In the reading selection that you had that was called, an overview of the family, you read about the fact that marriage is culturally defined. And what I mean by that is that how we define what marriage is and experience that is different from one culture to another. So in the United States and in our culture, the type of marriage that we have is called monogamy. And monogamy means that you have only one spouse. So we actually don't have strict monogamy. That would be where you have one spouse for your entire life and you can't ever have another one, even if your spouse dies. But we have something called sequential monogamy, or sometimes it's called serial monogamy, like kind of like a TV show that's a bunch of shows in a series, serial monogamy. And that means that you can only have one spouse at a time, but in your lifetime, you could have more than one. People that get divorced and remarried, they have more than one spouse in their lifetime. So that's the type of marriage that we have in our culture. And that's the type of marriage that you'll find all around the world, where people have only one spouse. Sometimes it's all they can afford in some cultures. About 70% of the cultures of the world embrace polygyny, Polygyny, as the main type of marriage in their culture. And polygyny means that one male has multiple wives. Okay, that's polygyny. And there are cultures that where polygyny is the norm for marriage, but there's still people there who practice monogamy because maybe they can't afford to have many wives. So in some cultures where you have multiple wives, the wives are almost a status symbol, like having in our culture, maybe having multiple vehicles and boats and cars and all of that stuff is kind of a status symbol. And then there's a picture here that I wanted to talk about, and it says photo of family where polyandry is the normal type of marriage. So polyandry, Polyandry, is a form of marriage in which a woman has multiple husbands. Now that one's a lot less rare than polygyny and um, and monogamy. It's polyandry is only in about 4% of the people in the world have that type of marriage in their culture. However, it is found on every continent, so it's not just isolated in some certain part of the world. And there's a picture here for you of a family from some folks in a society that call themselves the Nimba, and they live in a mountain high up in the mountains of Tibet. They live on a mountain, and there's only about 1,300 people in the entire society. And in that culture, they practice fraternal polyandry. So it's polyandry because a woman has multiple husbands, but it's fraternal because in their case, the husbands are brothers. So all the brothers in one family will take one wife. And in the picture, you can see it's kind of a little family photo there. The wife, her name is Zunkit, and it says at the bottom, Zunkit standing from left with her four husbands. Husband number one, that's Golga. Husband number two is Sonan. He's the one that introduced Zunkit to the rest of the family and persuaded all the brothers that she would be the one that they wanted to marry. Um, then I can't remember the third husband's name. I'm sorry, but it's been a long time since I read the article, and I don't actually have the physical article anymore. Um, the little boy with the orange at the bottom is Norbu, and he is also a husband. And a lot of times students will ask, about sex, and of course, he does not have sexual relations with the wife until he's an adult. So, and a lot of times students will ask about what about having babies and that type, and is there jealousy? Are the husbands jealous of each other? Well, not necessarily. And you have to understand that the cultural norms are different, and that makes you think differently about your experience in life. And so the if they do have a baby and they're not sure which husband is the father, they just usually say it was the oldest husband's baby. Okay, and the wife tries to get pregnant by the oldest husband first, and then the second one, and so on. And she would like to have a baby with each husband if they can. That's kind of a aspiration. So, what about jealousy? Well, you know, they don't have a word in their language that means romantic love. And we make a big deal about romantic love in our culture, but it wasn't really always that way. Long ago, there was arranged marriages were common in our culture, and I'm thinking about the Europeans that came over to this continent, and they the 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 husband and wife, the bride and the groom that would be they looked to the parents for guidance and direction, and it was often they thought about it as two families connecting to each other, not and often it was you needed to get your father's permission, or sometimes it was kind of a agreement between the father of the potential bride and the potential groom. But as the immigrants came into North America, there was a shortage of females, and during those rough and tumble times of pioneering the new world, and so that kind of accelerated the idea of romantic love because the men had to compete, right? So that's where you started getting courtship rituals started happening, and flowers and candy and all of that are maybe all part of that because they now had to compete because there wouldn't be a wife for everyone in a monogamous society. Now, so if these were Americans, they'd be pretty jealous. They'd have some issues. But the Nimba people don't have a word in their language for romantic love. And so one way that we might get some insight on about that is by thinking about an anthropological and sociological concept called the Saphir-Whorf thesis. So Saphir and Whorf is just the last names of two anthropologists that developed it. Another term, a name for the Saphir-Whorf thesis is the linguistic relativity hypothesis. So, and it's basically saying that the way we understand the world is relative to our language. So linguistic relativity. And if you think about it, it might be kind of a chicken and the egg situation because certainly we invent words to describe things that we think about, right? And things that are important to us. But at the same time, the words that the people who in a previous generations that have been created and the way they're used and how their meaning has changed over time also influences the way we think about the world and understand the world. So in a culture where they don't have a word for romantic love, they definitely have love, but they might not think of the love in terms of you belong to me and nobody else can have you, and my needs are important first. They might think more about the needs of the family as a group than the needs of the individual. And they might not see a conflict with the idea that you can love more than one person. So, but in our culture, we probably would have an issue with that. So that doesn't necessarily explain it, but it might explain it in part, right? It might explain in part. Really, we're ethnocentric if we say we've got to explain why these people are different from us, as if we are the right way and they're the oddballs, right? So maybe it doesn't need an explanation, but it is a different culture. And I find it very interesting that there are these different ideas about marriage and family around the world.